The garden looked bland, uninspiring. Apart from the green grass and green bushes, there was no color. There was a little flower bed at the far end, which was empty. Jacqueline had planted some daffodil bulbs in there over a year ago, but they never grew, much to her disappointment. She mostly stayed at home and was now retired. Recently she'd lost her mum, and it hurt very much. All she'd ever wanted was a garden that reminded her of her parents' garden from when she was a child, which had the most splendid colors that seemed so magical at the time. Her mum had always been a keen gardener, her dad not so much, and the sad thing was, since leaving her parents' house and moving to the big bad city where she lived for a number of years in a flat, she would miss it in a strange sort of way. City life wasn't so bad though. She worked in insurance where the pay was very good. While Jacqueline walked through the local park one day, she noticed how amazing the flowers looked from afar. Even though Jacqueline loved her job, she knew she had other responsibilities. She'd received a call from her mum that morning. Her father had just been diagnosed with the early stages of Alzheimer's. She'd left her job and moved closer to home within a month, where she could help mum look after dad. In some ways, she didn't mind. Family was more important than a good job. Maybe it was time to slow down a bit and enjoy the simpler things in life at the age of 53. She so wanted to make her mum proud, especially now she wasn't there anymore. She'd never been good at growing anything like her dad. After Jacqueline had eaten, she watched the news on TV, then decided to head to the local shop to get some milk. Jacqueline walked down the aisle to where the milk was in the shop. She overheard two women of a similar age talking about how beautiful their gardens looked with all the wonderful flowers. Jacqueline resented them. If her parent was still here, then mother could have helped her. Lately, she'd struggled with her mental health. It's like her motivation had gone. She was the most confident person she knew a few years ago. Now Jacqueline lived on her own in a place where she didn't know anyone, and yes, a lot of it was her fault for shutting herself away after losing her mum. Jacqueline didn't know what else to do. At the counter, she paid for the milk, then headed out of the shop to her vehicle, which was parked close by. Once in the car, Jacqueline thought of her parent, then said sadly, "I wish you were here. My garden is a mess. You'd know exactly what to do." Jacqueline dried her eyes with a tissue. She smelt the familiar aroma of a perfume her mum used to wear. Without giving it much thought, she started the engine and began the journey home. The young girl ran into the garden with her mum Carol. "Mummy, Mummy, why are we here again?" "I don't like it here, it's boring," the little girl said, disappointed. Carol bent down to her daughter. "Sweetheart, we're here to make this place look better for the lovely woman who lives here." The girl crossed her arms because she was unhappy. "But why? I want to play with my dolls." The woman kissed the top of Jacqueline's head, then replied, "You can play with them later, my darling. But for now, could you help me please? It's very important, you see." The girl came closer and cuddled her mum. "Okay, Mummy," was all she said. Carol then answered, "We must get on. Lots to do." With her daughter's help for the next 2 hours, Carol dug out a circle in the middle of the garden where seeds could be planted. Once they'd finished, Carol turned to Jacqueline while she ran around excitedly, then said, "You know I'm always with you, don't you, my darling? Even if I'm not here, I still am, if that makes any sense." The girl then remembered something which scared her very much. Jacqueline awoke and remembered the odd dream she'd had. She got out of bed and put some clothes on and headed to the bathroom to wash. After that, she went into the garden to have a cigarette. She'd smoked heavily for years, but these days she'd cut down to 6 a day. Jacqueline put the cigarette into her mouth and lit it. The first puff was always the best. She all of a sudden noticed something that sent alarm bells in her head. In the middle of the area of grass was a flower bed in the shape of a circle. Jacqueline nearly lost her balance. She needed to sit down. Did the dream last night really happen? Once she'd composed herself, she stood up and walked to the flower bed. She felt emotional. Maybe the dream she'd had and the circle appearing the next morning were just a bizarre coincidence? But if that was the case, then who'd been on her property last night and did this, unless it was troublesome kids, but why would they dig a large hole in the center of the garden? None of it made sense. Jacqueline carried on as normal for the rest of the day, trying to keep the strange events of last night out of her mind. She didn't want to get her hopes up, just in case it wasn't true. Darling, today we're going to tidy up the bushes, so they look nicer for the lovely lady who lives here. Also, over there we'll dig another bed out so more flowers can grow. How does that sound, sweetheart? Carol asked the child. The girl jumped up and down while shouting, "It sounds brilliant, Mummy." Carol laughed, "I'm happy you agree." Jacqueline walked outside, and the first thing she saw was the second flower bed at the back of the area the next morning. The surrounding bushes had been trimmed and looked much better. She realized with sheer delight that the dreams of being a child again with her mum were true. How was this possible? "I love you, Mum, and I miss you with all my heart," was all she said. The girl didn't understand. "What do you mean we're nearly finished, Mummy?" Carol looked at her sadly. "The gardens are close to being complete. All that's needed now are flowers. Magical flowers of various colors, but there's a knack for this. Watch and learn, my sweetheart, and last of all, it was lovely spending so much time with you again and all the help you have given me. Without you, this wouldn't have been possible." They cuddled. "What now, Mummy?" Jacqueline asked. "It's time for the seeds to go in," she answered emotionally, knowing it'd be the last time of seeing her. From her coat pocket were 3 bags of seeds of her favorite flowers. Carol planted them in both flower beds with planned perfection. Then something magical happened as the child turned into the woman she was now. She looked at her mummy and said, "I've missed you, Mum. I love you so much. I know I'll see you again one day, but I'm not ready to say goodbye." "It's time for me to go," Carol answered, sadness in her voice. Her mother stood up, walking to the back of the garden where another figure stood. It was her father, as she remembered him as a child. In front of them, an intense light appeared. Both were gone within a second. She awoke, and the sadness had disappeared. Once she'd dressed, Jacqueline ran out into the garden, and what she saw next took her breath away. The flowers had already blossomed in all their glory in the 2 beds, from different shades of blues to various pinks, to light and dark reds. It was truly magnificent. After eating breakfast later that morning, she decided to take her mum's advice and start living life to the full again. The end.